Hi guys, Samantha from GCMO Tutorials here, and today I'm going to show you how to create a faux stained glass pendant. So I've got a piece of black Primo here on a piece of white printing paper, and I'm just going to put another piece on top and we're going to burnish this quickly. And this is just going to smooth out any abnormalities that we might have on the clay and just give it a nice smooth texture. It's also going to be smoothing out the back of the piece, which means that we're not going to have to do any sanding later on to the back anyway. So there we go, that should be all it takes. Right, now I want you to pick a stencil of your choice. I'm using this beautiful tidal kind of stencil, and I am going to be using this piece over here. So now see how big that is, and then I'm going to actually trim around the stencil just roughly, because we're going to be putting silver leaf on this, and so any excess clay is going to get covered in that silver leaf. So if you don't want too much waste clay, just make sure to trim away some of that excess. Okay, now I'm going to put that over the top, press that down, okay, and then bring over your piece of paper again and burnish thoroughly. You want the clay to be sticking up through the stencil so that you almost have like a texture, and this will make applying our silver leaf later much easier. Now I'm using my fingers to do this. You can use a roller as well, it's completely up to you. Okay, and we should be just about done. Okay. Then again, with the leftover clay on the edge, I'm just going to trim that away because you can use that again. Alright, then bring over any silver leaf of your choice. Now the reason I'm using silver leaf today is because I want to colour this with alcohol ink later. If you didn't want to colour it with alcohol ink, you could use any metal leaf you wanted. You could also use those foils that you burnish onto the piece. It would be harder, but you could use those as well. So feel free to play around with that. Okay, and I'm just going to brush that onto the surface like so. Then bring over the paper again. And the reason I'm using the paper is because if you burnished this with your fingers, you would end up smudging the metal leaf, cracking it, and probably rubbing it straight off the clay. So if you're going to burnish it onto the clay, which you should, you want to be using a piece of paper so that the metal leaf doesn't stick to it, and so that you don't end up marring it while you're burnishing it. Okay, there we go. And I might continue burnishing just a little bit longer just to get fully stuck to that clay. Okay, now that I've got it burnished, this is optional, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to lift the stencil up, and hopefully the metal leaf will stick to all the clay pieces. But what can sometimes happen is the metal leaf on the clay pieces will still have a strong enough bond with the pieces that are not stuck on the clay to get ripped off, and then you get little black patches, which is not very nice. So I'm going to take a toothbrush and very, very gently brush over the surface to try to get the pieces that are on the stencil to lift up, like so. And I'm applying a very light hand to this because I don't want to mess up the metal leaf that is on the stencil. And now when I've got a fair bit off, I'm going to just brush it away. Now it does not have to be completely clean, it's just going to make lifting this up much easier. Okay, now I'm just going to remove that metal leaf quickly. Okay, and there we go, got rid of most of the metal leaf. Now before we do anything, I want you to just burnish this once more, just to get rid of any scratches that that toothbrush may have applied to the metal leaf. If you had a nice light hand, it shouldn't be very deep scratches. You should not be able to see black through the metal leaf, but there will be some scratches on the actual metal leaf surface. So you can see that there is some scratching, but that's fine. Now something I just want to talk about quickly is we're going to be using alcohol ink pens later on once this has baked. If you do not have alcohol ink pens but do have alcohol ink, then feel free to colour this now. Do not colour it with the alcohol ink later once you've baked, because the alcohol ink pens allow a lot of detailed work, and so you don't have to worry about the alcohol ink leaking into the places where the stencil is. But if you're using alcohol ink, it tends to run everywhere, and so having the stencil in place while you're colouring and then lifting the stencil off is better if you're using alcohol ink, from the bottles anyway. Now we're going to lift this up very gently. There we go. Okay, now put that away because that has stuff on it. Now you can see that there are some metal leaf areas where the stencil did not clean those areas up. So I'm just going to get a piercing tool, any needle-like tool, and I'm going to see if I can clean up those areas. Like so. Because you want your pattern to be as clean and crisp as possible. So I'm going to do that for a little bit. Alright, and there we go. Now I'm just going to bring over my piece of paper and I'm going to do a very light rub. I'm not burnishing this. I still want this texture to be raised. I'm just burnishing it to make sure that metal leaf is stuck down, and so that any ridges that might have been caused from the clay ripping a little bit when the stencil was raised have been flattened down. That's all I'm doing here. It's very light rubbing, no burnishing. Now I can see here that I did miss a spot over here where the metal leaf is, so let me see if I can quickly just break that up. There we go. Alright, and now we are going to cut our pendant out of this. Okay, so I'm going to be using one of my large arrowheads, like so. I want to choose a nice spot. That looks good. And then you want to cut. And now because it's on a piece of paper, it will stick in the cutter. If you had burnished this down onto a tile, it would not stick in the cutter. But keep it on the piece of paper means that you don't get any shiny spots, and it also means that you will not have to sand after you've baked. Now if I lift this carefully, there we go, it shouldn't stick. There we go, that away. Okay, now again, because of the paper, we are going to have a little bit of stuff along the edge. Just sliding your blade along it just to tuck it in will help. Again, if you want to avoid this, you can always just cut it on the tile, but just bear in mind that you're either going to need to put backing down, or you're going to need to sand the backing if you want it to look nice and clean. So generally I find that this, just gentle cleaning up around the edges, takes a lot less time than having to sand the back. Okay, there we go. So now I'm going to pop that into the oven for a full hour at Burroughs recommended temperature, and then when we're done we can start cleaning up those little spirals. Okay, and here it is out of the oven. Now we will need to clean up these sides in a minute or two, but first I want to colour this with the alcohol ink. So I'm going to be using a range of greens, blues and purples. Okay, so I've got some pens. Let me just get this out. There we go. So here are the ones that I've got. Now I'm using little tipsy pens, and you can see it basically I have a almost sea green, turquoise and purple. And if you do want to get these colours, these are the ones that I am using. There you go. But any alcohol ink pen should work. Okay, now I'm going to start with the purple. And you see how these have nice fine ends. And this is why I was saying that these are going to be nice to colour your piece, because they're very controlled. So what I'm going to do is I kind of am stippling it like this so that the colour isn't all completely even. That way it will add some interest. Now also bear in mind that we are going to be putting resin over this, and it is going to be looking quite different once we put the resin over. It's going to have much more of a sheen glass-like effect to it. Okay, and if you want multiple colours on the same piece, you can do that. Just blend them together like so. Just make sure you get all of that silver. There we go, so you can see there how we've kind of blended that together. Now I'm going to continue messing around with this, colouring in. I'm probably going to start with like purples and blues up here and then move down to blues and greens down this way. So now that you've seen the basic technique, where you just kind of stippling it the whole time, that's basically all I'm going to do. I'm just going to sit here and slowly colour these in so that we have a nice strong colour. Then afterwards we're going to sand the edges. Okay, and here's what we have so far. So you can see it's looking quite pretty. I'm going to start moving more towards greens down here, but I did want to just to give you a update on how it's going. So next time you see this, it will be finished. And there we go, all done. So now we want to move on to the sanding. So I've got a bowl of cold water here and a 400 grit sandpaper. So I've just wet the piece here, and you can see how that becomes so much more shiny once you wet it, which is what the resin's going to do. And I just want you to take the sandpaper and just sand these edges until they appear black. You don't want any of these silvery bits on them. So just continue doing that on all of the sides until they're nice and clean, and then we can move on to the sand, onto the resining. Okay, and here we go. So you can see the sides are much nicer and cleaner. There are a few little silver flecks here and there, but for the most part they're all clean. And also I give the sand a little bit of a back because the back a little bit of a sand because there was some silver pieces on there, but you can see how nice and neat that is too. Okay, so now we can move on to resining. So I've just got the silicone mat here, and this means if the resin does drip, which is the worst case scenario, we really don't want it to drip. If it does drip, it's not going to stick because the silicone will repel the resin. So you can see here's some resin. You can see it doesn't stick to the silicone, whereas if you were doing it on a tile, the resin would stick to the tile. Now I'm going to be using Magic Gloss. It has a really lovely dome, and also it doesn't run very easily, which is something that we want. Okay, so we're going to start with a little bit at a time. So I'm just going to pop a bit on there, and you can see how beautiful that looks under the resin. So now you want to take that, and we may have to do 2 coats because there is texture on the piece. Okay, and I just am spreading the resin around, making sure that there are no air bubbles. And if we have to do 2 coats, that's fine. Just be careful, don't add too much resin at once. You want to start out with less than you think you need and then add more from there. Because if it spills, it's a real tedious job to clean it up. And you can see how it's making that black really stand out. Very, very nice. Now I can't twist this around, so you're not going to be getting the full effect. So once this has finished curing, you'll be able to see exactly how it looks. So I'll continue spreading it out. Once you've spread it out, you want to let it sit for a moment or two. If it pulls away from the edges a lot, you can add some more resin. Don't add too much resin though. If it's got a pretty high dome already, put it into the UV light for about 15 minutes, get it to cure nice and hard, and then you can add another coat. Now I'm going to need to put some more resin over here. I just want to show you this whole process because it can be a little tricky sometimes. So I'm just going to show you the whole process to getting a beautiful glass-like dome on your piece. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to twist it around. I can see that it's pulling away from the edges over here. So I'm going to actually just run my skewer along the edge there, because I may have missed spots. But if it pulls away again, I will add some more resin. Okay, it's pulling away on this side as well, so I'm going to add some more resin. And just a little bit at a time. And make sure you pop those air bubbles when you get a chance before you put it into the UV light, because those are very unsightly. Okay, and when I am done with this and it's finished curing, I will show you how it looks. It should look really quite pretty when we're done. Okay, and here we go. So here it is out of the UV light, and you can see how beautifully reflective that is. So you can see it's almost like stained glass in a way. So the next step is going to be to apply a bail. Okay, so I'm going to be using a glue on bail today, and I'm just going to be using a little bit of Gorilla Glue. Now, this is a little tricky with this bottle. Just need a dab. There we go, that's more than enough. Okay, put that to the side. Bring over something to spread that. You only need a little bit of glue, and this actually is a bit much, so I'm just going to use the skewer to quickly get rid of some of that, because once you've stuck it onto your pendant and it starts oozing out the sides, there's very little you can do, so just make sure that you don't have too much on there ahead of time. Okay. And then I'm just going to stick it on like so. Okay, and press. Make sure that that's in the middle. Give it a little bit of time to work with it. Okay. And then I would advise leaving that for roughly an hour to make sure it is completely cured. I'd leave it for 24 hours before you actually start yanking on it and make sure that it's stuck firmly. But yeah, put that to the side and let that dry. Okay, and so I've left it for about an hour, and you can see that it's pretty strong. I don't want to be tugging on it because I like to leave it for about 24 hours to cure correctly. But it is strong enough now for us to string it. So I'm just going to use this rubber cord so that it doesn't take away from the pendant. If you wanted to use a different cord, you most certainly could. But I think that one looks quite nice. So again, it's a pretty simple technique, but it results in a very beautiful end product. Keep in mind that you can make earrings as well. I have made a pendant. Any stencil will work, any cutter will work. You can use any background clay you want. You don't have to use black, but I find that it looks the most striking when you use black. Also, again, play around with the different metal leaves. You don't necessarily have to put alcohol ink on them. If you just wanted to get a really nice black and silver effect, you could just use the silver leaf or any other color of leaf you wanted. Also remember, if you do not have any alcohol ink pens, you can always colour it with the alcohol ink while the stencil is still on the raw sheet of clay, so do remember that as well. And have fun. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.